And welcome to Polygon Issuance number 22. This could be a interesting program because it's probably going to be the first 10 minutes maybe trying to get our guest on the program. So he was in here before we turned on or went live on here. I could hear him. He couldn't hear us. Well, me in this case. So this is going to be interesting so far. So we'll see what happens. I might have to re-invite him. Let me do that. And let me make sure he's not sending me messages. He might be sending me messages on my other computer. Okay, let me make sure. Oh, no, I don't want to send him a message. Yes, let's invite everybody on here. I don't want to invite 50 people. Well, maybe we should do that, see who shows up. I think we should do that one episode. Just start inviting people. But right now the weather is out here, at least where I'm at. There's some clouds, there's some sun, there's some clear skies, there's some rain west of here. There's been some funnel clouds in central Iowa. I don't have, whoops, I still have my radar running. I gotta shut that off. We have right now some rain from about, oh boy, western Hardin County through Hamilton and southern Webster, southern Calhoun, southern Sac into southeastern Ida County, and this rain is barely moving. Wait a minute, let me see. Bear with us, folks. And I'm going to have to turn on my lights, I can see, because the sun has gone behind the clouds, so I'm going to have to turn on the lights. So now all this is going to do is make me hot. But that's what we got right now. In fact, I'm going to dare try to turn this on. This is what we have right now. Lots of funnel clouds in this area right about here where I'm circling. So there was some flooding down here near Omaha earlier, but it's now gone. So let me unshare that. My video should come back, and it did. So we're still waiting for our guest to reappear. He's getting his group of, trying to see what he's saying. He's getting his group of engineers together. I guess that's what they have in Houston, is a bunch of engineers. They grabbed them from NASA or something. So we'll see what happens. Otherwise, this could be a very interesting program. And we've been gone for 3 weeks. Last week I had internet issues, so our show last week had to be canceled. We rescheduled our guest, which was supposed to be Meredith Garofalo from KEYT in Santa Barbara, California. She'll be on in 3 weeks. And the week before that. And now Tim has appeared.
I am here.
I actually see Tim now.
How are you, Jeff? Can you hear me?
Fine. I spent 10 minutes. Oh, we're on live now, by the way. I spent 10
Okay.
minutes just gabbing to myself.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
We use kind of an extensive KVM system, and it's like every once in a while you got to reboot different parts of it to get the whole thing to work together again.
Yeah. I went through all the weather up here because we're having air mass thunderstorms. I'm sure you're used to that.
We get those at time every now and then. I'm actually headed to Iowa this weekend. I was hoping for some cooler weather.
No, you're bringing your Houston heat with you.
Apparently.
It's going to be the hottest. I might note it's going to be the hottest time of the year now. Cedar Rapids hasn't even hit 90 yet.
Well, we haven't hit 100 down here, and we think that's remarkable.
So I think I forecasted Cedar Rapids tomorrow at 89, and Sunday it's supposed to be really bad, 91, 92.
You know, the problem up there, though, I grew up in Iowa, as you know. And
in
my
Prairieburg.
Yes, Prairieburg, 160 people, maybe 164 now, I'm not sure. But my folks have like 2 window air conditioning units, and I always say that the problem up there is not the heat, it's the air conditioning. That we've perfected the art of air conditioning down here in the South, and we go up there and we just kind of melt. You just don't have the cool air that we're used to.
Yeah, I might note for the fact, Tim, that I'm in Anamosa, so I'm just down the road.
Are you really? Yeah, you are.
Yeah. So I was in I went near Prairieburg a couple weeks ago. There's not much left in town.
No. You know, the Prairie Moon Ballroom, once that burnt down, that kind of closed things down. Although they did build a new bar. They've got a really nice bar up there. And here's the part. It's funny because there's a guy here in Houston whose daughter went to school with my son, and he's from Anamosa, and every time we get together we talk about tenderloins, pork tenderloins that you can only get in Iowa. We miss those. We don't have those down here in Texas. So he's like me. Every time we go home, we have to get a pork tenderloin. And the new restaurant bar, which is actually still called the Prairie Moon up there in Prairieburg, has awesome pork tenderloins. Huge.
Yeah, we're going to be discussing tenderloins. You tweeted everything weather, and all we're talking about is food.
That's all right. Sometimes it's kind of nice to have a conversation that's not about the weather, just every once in a while.
Yeah, well, before you came back on, I was discussing the thunderstorms that we were having in central and western Iowa. We've had numerous funnel clouds. I'm thinking, please don't let there be severe weather when I'm doing this program. So that's why I'm the only one in here right now. My co-host is actually doing our Facebook and Twitter account to make sure we're not going to have severe weather.
Well,
He's probably going to join later if the storms start to die down, but we've had some crazy weather where storms develop after sunset and they're all nutty. So, but then the thing is, up until a couple days ago, here where I'm at in Anamosa, we've only had like a third to half an inch of rain in 5 weeks.
Wow.
And then it started raining again.
How's the corn looking up there?
The corn is actually still pretty good. I mean, I think it's because we haven't had any hot weather to burn it.
Right,
so I think that's the only thing that's helping it right now. But we pretty much had eradicated almost all the drought, and now it's starting to come back again. But then southwest Iowa's had like 8 inches of rain in the last week and a half or something. But
yeah. Well, that's an average thunderstorm here in Houston.
Yeah, or the storms that we're having in western Iowa where they're not moving. That seems to be typical in the Gulf Coast, where you get storms that, if I'm right, come off the ocean breeze.
Sometimes we get these. In fact, last week we had a case where we had like a little intersection of an outflow boundary from storms that initially fired up in North Texas, and you could clearly see those decaying on the satellite, and then the new clouds popping up a few hundred miles to the south of it, and then that outflow boundary ended up colliding with the sea breeze, and we had some pretty good thunderstorms that didn't move for a while, and quickly dropped 2-3 inches of rain, where you get those little cell intersections there. And if it happens in the wrong spot in this town, it just kind of shuts everything down. I call them disruptive downpours because it's an incredibly heavy rain, and it kind of shuts down that area, that part of the road while it's raining. And then 15-20 minutes later, the water runs off, goes into the bayou, the streets are drying up, and everybody kind of goes out about their day. I've never lived anywhere where we can have flooding be the lead story at 6 p.m. for our newscast, and at 10 o'clock we barely talk about it except for the weather section because all the water's gone by then.
Now, unlike here where we get flash flooding and it's like news for like days.
Days, right.
Which is interesting because we're gonna try to get into talking about you more. But we had June was our wettest ever, which is completely nuts since we had barely any rain since. At least here where I'm at, we had like roughly 7 inches of rain in about 2 days. And then the worst thing happened. You get a severe thunderstorm blow through, which was June 30th. And here, in Anamosa where I'm at, we had, if I was to take a guess, about 30 to 40% of the trees get uprooted or knocked down.
Wow.
That was the first time I'd ever seen trees completely flat like that. And they would come back up.
Right.
Thinking, okay. And I was at my parents' house. They live on the other side of town. And I'm at upstairs because there's no tornado warning. There was a severe thunderstorm warning. And I'm looking out my parents' back door outside, and I'm seeing tree limbs that are about this thick flying through the wind. And I'm thinking, okay. And I'm hearing stuff hitting the house. And I'm thinking, I think we need to go to the basement. I'm thinking, I don't think I like this, but yeah. And the funny thing is, around where my parents live, there were some people up there that didn't have power for 3 days because it really made a mess. And the funny thing is, where I'm at here, I'm on the east side of town. I had lost power, from what I gathered, for like 5 minutes, and
Wow.
they didn't have power for 3 days. So, well, my parents I think got it in a day, but some other people got it 3 days. So. That's enough about all me and stuff. We need to talk about you. We didn't invite guests to talk about me 25 times.
Well, but how many times do you have a guest that actually knows exactly where Anamosa, Iowa is?
Let's see, how many? I think we've only had one.
You know, some of my fondest memories are not really detasseling corn outside of Anamosa. I did that for one horribly long summer. And I was a tall guy, and so they naturally said, hey, you're tall, so you get to be like a detasseling crew chief. I had no idea what I was doing except that we have to pull the tassels off. But it was, oh, God, it was awful work. And I tell my kids about that experience over and over and over. Tell them, you know, it's kind of my, like, you know, in the old days, how hard it was, how hard we had it. That's the story I tell them. You know, you kids have it so lucky these days.
Yeah, and that makes me think, I have not seen anybody detasseling this year, because the corn was put in, quite a bit of the corn was put in late this year. So, because we had a wet spring, surprise, surprise. But, and then we seemingly are having a dry summer, except for June, which was very wet. But I think if they're detasseling now, because the corn's still green, unlike it was in 2012 where the corn turned brown in July and completely started just dying, but yeah, I never detasseled because I didn't want to do that.
Yeah, it's awful work.
You get paid a lot, but it's awful.
Yeah, and the worst part is that you have to wear. Well, we wore, I think it was trash bags, because the corn leaves cut you. You know, they're kind of almost like a razor edge there.
Yeah.
And so we would wear trash bags because the corn would also be covered with dew in the morning. So you'd be soaking wet if you didn't have a trash bag to keep you dry and to keep your arms protected, and you'd wear long sleeve shirts. And of course, it's in the middle of July or early August, and it's extremely humid, and it's not fun work.
And that's how you got into the weather. You got it because you were in farm fields looking for corn stalks.
That's right. I said, I'm never going to work outside in weather like this. I want to work in a 65-degree studio, and there I am.
Yeah, but the odd thing is, you're like, well, I don't want to be in Iowa. I'll be in Texas, where it's like hot longer.
Well, you know, that's kind of as an accident. I never in my life, A, thought I would ever work in a major market TV station, and B, never ever thought about Texas. And it was kind of a fluke. I was working at KGAN TV in Cedar Rapids, and we had severe weather all day, and things were kind of winding down. And I'd just gotten off the air at 6 o'clock, and my phone rang, and it was a news director who was staying at, I think it was called the Collins Plaza. It was across the street. And he said, I'm a news director from Dallas, and I'm in town, and I just saw your weathercast. Could you come over and have dinner with me? And I said, okay, sure. So we had a great conversation, and at the end of it, he said, well, I'll have my assistant call you, and we'll set up an interview. And I thought, yeah, sure. What are the chances this is really going to happen? And the thing is, we always say, kind of half jokingly in this business, you never know who's watching. Well, in this case, it happened to be a news director who ended up offering me a job in Dallas, Texas, and 2 weeks later, or 3 weeks later, we were boxing up everything in the house and moving to Dallas, which was never on my radar. So, Texas is interesting. It's not Iowa, but we've been here now for about 20 years, so it's kind of becoming our second home.
Yeah, between Dallas and Houston.
Right.
You went to Houston so you could see hurricanes, evidently.
I always tell people that if you map out where I have worked, it's just we just keep getting farther south on the map. So I guess Mexico's where I'm going to end up next, or Brownsville. I don't know, but
Miami.
I don't know. I'd rather stay in Houston, I think. We loved Houston. My wife is from Chicago, and we love Houston because it seems very, and this is going to sound very strange, but it seems very Midwest to us. The people are friendlier here than they were up in Dallas, and I might make some people mad by saying that, but the people seem to be a little friendlier here, a little more laid back. It's very much Houston. It's very much a blue-collar town. Cedar Rapids is very much a blue-collar town. I grew up in that. And so I can kind of relate to the people here, the people that live here, the people that watch us, and it just feels very comfortable here. Now, it's a little hot and a little humid at times, but outside of that, it's not a bad place to live.
Yeah, I've never been to Houston. I've been to Dallas, and I would not want to live there. So I'm making them more mad.
It's interesting because Dallas is only 4 hours north of Houston, but the weather is so completely different, as you probably know. I mean, up there we're dealing with dry lines. You do have severe weather all the time in the spring and the summer, at least early summer, and then again usually toward the second half of the summer into the fall, the second severe weather season, if you will. And then of course you actually get some winter weather up there, 2 or 3, 4 events during the winter. Where down here it's all, well, outside of the tropical weather, it's flash flooding because of heavy afternoon thunderstorms, sea breeze activity. Dry line usually doesn't bother us down here, although occasionally we'll get the outflow from those. So it's remarkable how different the weather is down here compared to what's just 4 hours north of us.
Yeah, but then you're bringing your weather here this weekend.
Right. Sorry about that.
I mean, and that's the interesting thing, because you've been not just in Cedar Rapids. I believe you were in Dubuque once. And
yes. KDUB TV.
And I believe there was a certain person that wrote a book that was this book.
Oh, yes! Awesome! Have you read that?
This and
the other two?
The other two.
Yeah, you can't give away what happens in the third one. I was kind of sad about that.
You read it then.
Oh, yes, absolutely. In fact, it was funny because Tom Jones, I believe, is the author's name. Or did he say what Tom Jones or Thomas Jones?
He wrote it as T.P. Jones, but I think
okay, T.P. Jones. So here I am. Brand new in this business of TV, and this guy calls and he says, "Do you mind if I spend a few days with you, just kind of observing what you're doing?" And I'm like, sure, what are you doing? And he's like, I'm writing a book, and one of the characters is a weatherman, and I'm not gonna, you're not going to be the character, but there might be things that you do in your job that I might want to borrow from my character. And so I thought, okay, this will be fun. Well, so I think he was maybe a week or two. He just came in and kind of shadowed me and would ask questions. What are you doing? He was taking lots of notes, and then I never heard from the guy for, I don't know, 20 years maybe? It was a significant amount of time. And then all of a sudden, this book shows up and in my mailbox, and I open it up, and I'm like, oh my God, this is the book. And we ended up connecting via email, and it was pretty cool to read it, because every once I'd be reading it, and he talked about, for example, the weather families. That's what we called them up there in KDUB. Here we call them weather spotters. I think at Channel 9 it's the in Cedar Rapids, I don't remember what they call them, the weather observers or whatever. But every station has that local, those local families. We called them weather families, and he used that in the book. I think he used the name of the computer. It was funny because we had a code word that for the control room, our computer was notorious for locking up on us. And so I said to the control room, if you ever hear me use the word Hazel, that's what we called the computer, because that was the name on a box next to it, I guess. But we called the computer Hazel. I said, if you ever hear me use the word Hazel on TV, go to the 7-day forecast. It means I'm out of maps. Nothing's working out here. And so it was kind of a code word for the control room. Well, he ended up using, I think he used Hazel, or at least he referenced the fact that we named the computer in the book. And I'm reading this going, well, this is so cool.
Yeah, so it was almost like a flashback to the beginning of your career.
Right.
And you're now in Houston. I believe that you were in Houston at that time.
Yes, yeah. When he finally published the book, I was.
Yeah. So it's like, oh, this seems so old now.
But it seems very familiar because really everywhere that I worked, we've kind of done this. It's the same. We had a network of weather observers that I set up when I worked at Channel 2, which they still have, I believe.
Yes.
Network of weather observers at KDFW when I was there. I believe that you have to have. I mean, nowadays you can get some with dual pole radar. You can get a better idea of how much rain fell, but we really needed ground truth. Here in Houston, we're lucky because we've got TxDOT has and Harris County Flood Control has rain gauges all over the city. But outside of the city, there's not too much ground truth to what you're seeing on the radar. So the weather observers give us that connection, that eyewitness report of what's happening in their neighborhood. So it was kind of cool, but at the same time, a flashback of the early days.
Do you kind of wish it was like that back then now?
No, not at all. No.
You don't want to end up pounding a computer or something?
No, I'm so blessed that we've got, for example, when I couldn't get the microphone or the speakers to work, I called my extension up here. The guy immediately is rebooting things and, fixing things for me. And, we've got computer systems that hardly ever crash, knocking on wood here. Those were good days, though, because it really taught you to be creative with limited resources. I remember that job at KDUB that we had a contract, and this goes way back. Nowadays we see satellite images, and when they're in severe weather mode, they're scanning every minute. Well, we had dial-up satellite that you would have to dial into the system, and you would watch every pixel update. And we were under contract. We were only getting 30 images a month. So that meant one satellite image per day that we would show on the air. And I got creative in the sense that if there wasn't any weather, we wouldn't show satellite, so that maybe one day I could show 2 or 3 together in a little loop. And you make chicken salad out of what you have to work with. In that case, lemons out of lemonade, or lemonade out of lemons. It just was. You just had to create things because you didn't have the resources that everybody else did.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think anybody would want to go back to dial-up or dialing things, or no.
We take all of this for granted. I mean, I worked with Difax maps that I don't even know if do you know what those are?
Yeah, I've seen them.
Okay, you've seen them. Well, we had to deal with the old Difax maps, and it would take forever for the maps to be printed out, and then by the time that they print out, they were really old because it just took that long to print. The old teletype, where the worst part with the old teletype machines is that you would know that there is some kind of warning because it would ring an alarm, but they had all these coding, which they still do at the top, but they had all this code at the top, and so you'd have to wait for all of this code to type out before you actually got to the guts of the warning. So you knew it was a tornado warning, you knew it was for your area, but you didn't know when, and you didn't know where, and you just had to wait for that information. And we didn't have radar, so we were totally relying on the Weather Service for that.
And that was when you were in Dubuque then?
Yeah, yes.
And
it wasn't much better when I was in Jeff City, Missouri. It was a little better, but not much.
Yeah, and that was after Dubuque, and then you went from Jefferson City to Cedar Rapids, right?
Cedar Rapids, and then from Cedar Rapids to Dallas, and then Dallas to Houston.
Yeah, I that's kind of like the all over the place, and then you're in a big market, and then you're going to Hurricane Central, except you've been lucky there hasn't been any knock on wood for that lately.
Well, lately, Ike was our last one. We're 6 years now since Hurricane Ike, 2008.
Yeah,
so.
I don't think you want any right now, because that could be. I wouldn't mind having a remnant come through here and dump rain.
We were in a drought a couple of years ago, and it was, it's really the only time I've ever heard people say, "Oh, we need a hurricane," because hurricanes are notorious for ending droughts here in Texas. And it's kind of one of those things. Be careful what you wish for here. Even a tropical storm. We had Allison, which is the only tropical storm to have a name retired, and that dumped over 4 feet of rain in some parts of our city. 4 feet of rain. So yeah, it would have been nice to have a little bit of moisture, but you don't want it all at once.
Yeah, comparable to, like, say, the flood up here 6 years ago, or the flash flood event we had this year. You just don't want a bunch of rain all at once. I mean, I would have liked to have a lot of that rain spread out over the end of July and this month, but
right.
Well, but yeah, we just spent 25 minutes, and we're not even up to the point of saying who you are and what you do.
Nice talking with you.
yeah, we're not even to the part where we're actually supposed to introduce you. So, but anyway, I'm sure everybody knows who this is. So, but in case people don't know or don't have a clue, this is Tim Heller. He's the chief meteorologist. I believe he's the chief. Maybe
Yes,
he's
sir.
the senior meteorologist.
Kind of both.
He's the old man.
Oh, don't say that. Come on, Jeff.
He detasseled corn in the old days.
That's right.
And he drove to the cornfield in a Model T.
Not that bad.
Okay, he was in a Model A.
Radar.
He didn't have radar. He had to use clouds and say it's raining. But
it's funny. When I first started here, we were looking to do something different in terms of hurricane coverage, and I found on the back wall of our studio, the old, behind the set, they just built the set up about 2 feet away from the back wall, and there was the old weather map of the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean, the old magnetic map. And so I went to management. I said, let's try something different. Let's pull the map off the wall, mount it, and actually use magnetic symbols on that. And this is very dynamic. We can show where the storm is. We can physically move it then on the map. And so the first year I was here, kind of as a nod to the old days, we used magnetic map just for hurricane coverage. And I thought it was pretty cool. It only lasted 1 year. Then we decided we needed to go back to the old computer maps. We still did some of that, but we kind of used the big magnetic map as a way to introduce our tropical storm coverage. It was kind of fun, actually.
Now, do you do when, let's say a Hurricane Ike comes through? I would assume you're wall to wall then.
Right. Yeah, we go, and it depends on really how the storm is behaving, but we go, our shifts will be divided up as 12 hours on, 12 hours off, but you're never really off. And, during Hurricane Ike, we slept here at the station. In fact, we were in the other studio. Our set was in the other studio at the time. No, we were in this studio. We slept in the other. We have 2 studios here. And so they brought in all these air mattresses, and, we all slept here at the station. And, we had porta potties if we needed them, but we've got giant generators out back, so we kept, we had power. The water stayed running, so that was good, but we didn't have too much damage here. We did have a roof leak, ironically, above the weather center where the computers are mounted in a rack, and water poured. I don't know how we stayed on the air with the computers, but water poured on top of the computers, and they were able to tent them and keep them dry during the storm. But yeah, you're here to the very end. I mean, I went home, I think it was Wednesday. No, I went home Thursday night. Landfall was Saturday morning. I went home Thursday night knowing that when I was coming back, I wouldn't be back for 3 or 4 days. And so I made sure everything was okay at home, and the family was ready to go. And I got up Friday morning bright and early, turned on the TV, and saw floodwater in downtown Galveston. The Strand was already flooded. That the storm surge was coming in. We still had sunshine, but the storm surge was coming in ahead of the storm, which, if you've read anything about Hurricane Ike, was the big problem in that storm. We had storm surge that was 15 to 21 feet high, depending on where you are along the coast there. And I immediately threw everything into the suitcase and said, I got to go. I'll see you later, because this thing's coming in now in terms of the surge. So I was here then Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I think it was Monday or Tuesday that I finally got out of here. But it was a surreal experience. I mean, even though there were times where I was off the air, you can't check out of a storm like that. I mean, you're still helping out behind the scenes, whatever needs to be done.
So you would compare, let's say, wall-to-wall hurricane/tropical storm coverage to, say, severe weather coverage, say, in Dallas and or up here?
I would say it's more like a winter storm that you guys might have up there in Iowa, because it's one of those things where you kind of know a few days in advance that this is coming in. You know that a slight change in the track is going to be a big change in terms of how much snow you would get in the case of a winter storm, or how much ice you might get. And the same thing for us, a slight change means a difference in the wind and the surge. And so you're tracking it for a couple of days, and then all of a sudden, here it comes, it's in, and it's a combination of a weather story and a news story. The weather, describing what's going on and what's expected to happen over the next several hours and couple of days, and news interjecting every once in a while with reports of the damage that they have and the problems that they're having on the streets. And so I think it's more comparable to a winter storm, in the Midwest, a storm that just kind of shuts down everything for a few days. Yeah,
but when you were up here, either down in Missouri or in Dubuque or Cedar Rapids, did you ever have to go wall to wall with snow storms? Because here it's like it snows. Oh, it's snowing.
I don't think so, Jeff. I think I think there might have been extended coverage, but I don't think it was wall-to-wall coverage that lasted days. I know when Ike we were on the air. When I finally had some time to kind of check out for a little bit and go back home and see what everything was like. I think we were still on the. I think we were on the air commercial-free nonstop for about 5 days. And at that point, and this might sound kind of strange, we started to run commercials, not so that we could make money, although that's not a bad thing, but to kind of give people the sense that things were returning back to normal. We felt it was important to show some kind of structure, because there were some things returning back to normal, and we kind of felt that we needed to start to break up our coverage and make it more like a traditional newscast. And so there was a very obvious and very deliberate change in how we covered the storm, so that people would kind of have a sense that, okay, we're getting through this. I mean, and that, I think, has to be the message in these extended storms, is that, okay, we live here too, we're going through it with you, we're going to get through this together. It's not going to be fun, it's going to be unpleasant, it might be scary, but we're going to get through this, and eventually we'll get back to normal here. And so I think it was about 4 or 5 days that we finally decided, okay, let's start to put some commercials in so that people can get a break. And I think that's important.
Now, compare that to any severe weather coverage you've done over the years.
Right.
Mainly not in Houston, because they very rarely get much. Although now I probably just put the kiss of death on that. You'll probably have tornadoes now.
Thank you. Yeah, I was on the air in Dallas when we had the Fort Worth tornado that went through downtown Fort Worth.
Yeah, in 2000.
Yeah, and that was one of those things that happened at 5:55 is when the tornado warning hit, and it was kind of one of those things. And you learn something from every storm. The monitor we had on our weather desk was literally about this big, and our thought was, well, we just need to reference it just to know when we're on camera. When I went back, and I don't like to watch my coverage immediately after a storm. I kind of wait, a couple of months and go back and kind of look at it with fresh eyes. And I went back and I looked at the coverage, and I couldn't believe that our camera in downtown Fort Worth had the tornado. Not the tornado, had the debris. That we were picking up the debris, but I couldn't see it in the tiny little monitor. I remember the moment as I was watching it where we showed the tower cam, we showed some dark clouds moving into downtown Fort Worth, and then I cut over to radar and said, let's check and so we were doing radar analysis. What I didn't realize is that right toward the end, what you saw was debris flying up in front of the camera. And it's kind of one of those moments, it's like, all right, we need bigger monitors so that we can see what's going on. But that was one of those cases, too, where we were on the air, we were on the air for a couple of hours because, of course, then after the storm moved out of Fort Worth, we were still dealing with the Dallas area. So it was, about 2, 3, 4 hours worth of coverage as opposed to 2 or 3, 4 days of coverage. But they're both pretty intense.
Now compare that to if, like, the storms up here back then in the 90s when you were up here and even into the 80s,
Yes.
severe weather coverage up here was kind of a bit all over the place.
Well, I think I think that what changed was that we had storm spotters that started taking video and making that video available to media outlets. Now, of course, it's on YouTube and it's all over the internet, but that when we started to see more video of these storms actually developing, that changed. I mean, they were doing it for a long time in Oklahoma City before the rest of us even thought about doing it. So then all of a sudden, spotters like what you have up there in Iowa now, you've got storm spotters that go out and shoot that video, make it available on the internet. Well, back then, in the late 80s, early 90s, that was rare that we could actually have video showing you what the tornadoes are doing. And it was usually afterwards. We didn't, for example, even in the Fort Worth tornado in 2000, we didn't, outside of our tower cam, which ended up being blown away, Tim Marshall, who you may know, contacted me and said, hey, I was north of downtown and got the tornado coming into downtown Fort Worth. And so I sent him back a note. I contacted my management. I said, okay, we got some video. The guy's going to sell it to us. And I think we bought 30 seconds. That's what they said. Okay, you got 30 seconds of video we're going to buy. And so Tim came in, we went to an edit booth, and I found 30 seconds of video that I wanted, and it had to be continuous. Nowadays it just seems like it's so much easier, but back then, we had 30 seconds of video we were willing to buy, and I don't know what we paid for it, but that was all that they wanted to buy. And so, that was a big deal. The fact that at 10 o'clock that night, and it was like at 9:50, 9:55, we were still slamming tape together. So then we started our 10 o'clock newscast. We had the picture of the tornado coming into downtown Fort Worth and picking up the debris. He was north of the storm, but had great visibility just by the way that the storm was structured. So he got it picking up all the debris and going right into the buildings downtown, which then, of course, took out all the windows in the buildings downtown.
Yeah, so, I mean, during your time when you were at least up here, it seemed like we didn't have very active weather, I would say, except for, wasn't the flood of '93 toward the end of your time up here?
Yes, yeah. That was really, I'd forgotten all about that.
Yeah, the flood of 2008, nobody remembers the flood of '93 anymore.
I know. That was... I'll never forget that. I mean, I've forgotten about it. But there was one night, because it was raining non-stop. And I remember one night, and we were doing cut-ins all the time. I mean, I don't know how many days I was at work, and this was at KGIN in Cedar Rapids, where I was working at the time. And I remember one night, I'd just gotten off the air. We did yet another cut-in showing where the water was. And for those people that don't remember, we had flooding, and then the water would come down, and then we'd have heavy rain, and the floodwaters would come up, and we had heavy rain. And I don't know, some people were flooding 3 or 4 times. And the phone rang, and I picked it up. I just gotten off the air, and this woman on the other end, was crying. And I don't know why I'm getting choked up about it, telling you the story, but it really, her house had flooded multiple times. She was just beside herself. She just needed to talk to somebody. And it was kind of one of those moments for me that made me realize, I mean, we throw out facts and figures and numbers, and here's another radar loop, here's another satellite loop, and here comes the storm, and we track it down to city street level, and we forget sometimes that there's people living in those spots that we're tracking, that there are homes there that are being flooded, that there are families that are being disrupted, their lives are being disrupted, or in case their belongings destroyed. And I just sat on the phone and listened to her for about a half hour, just purge, and she just needed somebody to talk to. I mean, she was terrified of every storm now because she had lost so much. And I often wonder what happened to her. She was down, I know she lived in Iowa City, but and this was many, long time ago, so I don't even know if she's still around, but whatever happened to her and her belongings. And I know that there were a lot of people that went through that, but it just touched me that it just was kind of an eye-opening experience that there are people watching us and are affected by every word we say.
Yeah, and the bad thing about '93 was it, like you said, rain, and then 2008 up here, it was all of that, plus having a bunch of snow the winter before that all melted, kept the rivers high, and that just I know up here, now we're going to talk about me again, but I at the time was living in Springville, and my parents were still living here. My parents lost, I think, Anamosa here lost their sewer system for a day.
Hmm.
I know, of course, as you saw when you were from all the video that Cedar Rapids turned into Venice,
Right.
Italy.
Right.
And they're still, it's almost back to, except for the west side of Cedar Rapids, as you've been up numerous times, still looks fairly barren at this point. So, and they're still fighting to try to get the flood walls. So, but then they had the flooding this year, and the river started coming up, and everybody started going nuts again.
Right.
And the funny thing happened, and was they plugged up, and you may remember this from being up here, that when the Cedar River floods in Cedar Rapids, they bring all the stuff to plug up all the manhole covers so the water doesn't come shooting out in the low-lying areas.
All right.
What ended up happening is the river started coming up because they thought it was going to flood Czech Village again.
Oh.
For those that don't know, that's just south of downtown Cedar Rapids. Whereas in 2008, Czech Village was completely almost destroyed. It's now back to normal, except you go south of 16th Avenue Southwest where Czech Village is, and there's almost no house. There's maybe one house every block now. It looks like a ghost town. But anyway, so the river came up, but then they forecasted it up to like something. It didn't even get close to that. Well, then what happened is then we had that event around the end of June. They didn't take the covers off the manhole covers, so what ended up happening? All the city streets started flooding because the water had nowhere to go because they had plugged everything up. So then you had a flash flood event where every street had, and this was even far from the river, where you had cars floating down the street. And I'm thinking, that never happened in 2008, so we never had flooding way up. We had it up by Wellington Heights, of course, you might know where that is. Way up east, like almost a mile and a half east of downtown, there was water, cars floating away. So,
wow.
And I'm thinking, okay, this is not good. But anyway, and when you talk about the flood of '93, and when I'm talking about the flood of 2008, it'd be like, oh, it's a typical day in Houston.
It's
I'll
not
take
uncommon.
a typical day in Houston right now, but right now the sun has set, or the clouds, because I'm looking out my window, I'm looking west. It is, I can't tell. I think there's clouds in the distance, but I can still, that's why it's kind of dark over here, because I have my door open. So.
See, I got electronic windows in here. We don't have any windows in the studio, but I've got monitors showing all of my what
Isn't
it's like.
that kind of the case that all weather centers don't have windows?
Yeah, I know.
Have you ever had a window at any place you've ever worked?
I don't think so. No. You know, it's funny because well, listen. When I started at KDUB, the weather center literally was in a closet. They had so little space. They stuck this weather computer, which was, that was big back then. They actually had a computer to make graphics, and they stuck it in the corner of this closet. And so all day long, I would have people coming in to get office supplies in the weather center. I think we've come pretty far.
Yeah, is anybody coming in to get weather supply or
no office supplies here.
Well, I don't know. There may be like a stash of them somewhere. You never know. But so what? Now we're kind of going backwards because I'm kind of going all over the place. But okay, so how did you end up getting into this business of having to forecast flooding and going through hurricanes and talking about tornadoes and et cetera, et cetera?
Well, I kind of fell into this. I initially thought I wanted to be a news anchor, and that goes back to when I was in high school. How old are you, Jeff?
Right now, I will be 34 in September next month.
Do you remember the Dr. Max show?
Yep.
Okay. So I was in high school, and we were doing I don't know, something at our school, and we got to be on the Dr. Max show. And I remember walking into that studio at what was then WMT TV, and then later was renamed KGAN. I remember walking in there, and they said, you know, here's the set, you know, this little dinky thing over in the corner, and they were getting all set up ahead of time. And they said, if you want, just go ahead and sit up here on the news desk while we're getting set up. And I remember sitting in the spot where Dave Shea sat, and looking at the cameras, thinking, I want to do this someday. This is what I want to do. And it was like this pivotal moment in my life where I had decided that that was my career choice. Well, so that was that. So then when I went to school, I studied communications, I studied broadcasting, journalism. I thought, okay, that's what I want to do. And with a little diversion there, thinking that maybe I would try computer science, and then I said, no, this is too boring. I'm not going to spend my day looking at a computer. I know. Anyway, so then I kind of went back into communication, said, okay, that's what I'm going to do. And then I was looking for an internship, and I had noticed on the bulletin board in our communications department at Clark College, which is now Clark University in Dubuque, that they were looking for part-time camera operators at KDUB, and so I did that. So I'm like, this is great. This will be my foot in the door so that I can get a job in the news department. And so at the end of the semester, I went into the news director, and he said, oh, you know, listen, I haven't had time to think about internships. I need somebody to do weekend weather. And I said, let me do that. And he goes, well, what do you know about the weather? I said, not too much, but I'm willing to learn. And so he auditioned me, and he said, no, you're good enough. So I did. It's a small market. And so I did, and it was rip and read. I mean, the majority of my day was spent just making graphics, which took forever to build, and I took that job thinking that it would lead me to a job in the news department. So fast forward a couple of years, I did that. Graduated from college, got a job at WIFR TV in Rockford, which I don't even put on my resume because I was only there for like 2 months, and I was a news reporter / weekend weather, and I hated it. I hated covering city council meetings and trials, and I remember gangs were just starting to spill in to Rockford out of Chicago, and I remember going out with Les, I think was my camera operator's name, and he would put on a bulletproof vest, and he'd say, I'm going on the interior, you get to ask the questions on the exterior. The people gathered around the shooting, and if you don't hear from me, get on the two-way and call them at the station and get back up. I'm thinking, I'm from Prairieburg, Iowa. We don't have this kind of stuff. And KDUB called me, and the news director called me, and he said, listen, I know you just started there, but would you like to do our 6 and 10 o'clock weather? And I said, yes, I would love it. And I that was a favorite part of my day, or favorite part of my week, was doing the weather on Saturday and Sunday. I hated the reporting and the news side of it. And so I went back, and I walked in, and they had the Difax machine sitting there spitting out these maps, and I thought, I'm going to need to figure out what I'm doing here. So initially I started on my own. I bought as many books and a lot of them were for Air Force forecasting books on Difax charts and things like that. So I kind of taught myself some initial forecasting. And then when I decided to leave KDUB, I was looking for a job specifically in a market that had a university with a meteorology program, and ended up at KRCG in Jefferson City, Missouri, thinking that I would go back to school during the days up at Mizzou, University of Missouri-Columbia, where they had a meteorology department. And so that was the plan. That didn't work because I got a call to go from a TV station in Cedar Rapids that said, we want you to come back and do our 6 and 10 o'clock weather here. And at that point I thought, well, I don't have a choice. Now I've got to go. So I'm going to go through the Mississippi State program. And so I did that for, I think it took 4 years to complete that. And so I kind of did it the hard way. I always tell students now, I'm like, if you can figure out, and I've got a son who's in college, so he's heard me give this speech too. If you can figure out the general idea of what you want to do with your life, it'll be a lot easier than going back to school later and trying to pick up some of the knowledge that you need. But I did it the hard way. It'd be a lot easier if I'd just gone to school initially, but my career was working. It was taking off. I couldn't just stop and say, I need to go back to school first. When somebody's offering you a good-paying job, you got to go for it.
Now, if somebody was to do that now, they would probably struggle.
The same path?
Yeah.
No, I think they still have. I think in fact, there may be other what they call off-campus or correspondence programs. I'm not sure about that, but I think they still have that.
Yeah, they still have the Mississippi State program. I was speaking of trying to start learning from the before you did it and then going back and doing it.
Right. And I also think I think it's going to be easier for somebody to get a job if they've got, a BS in meteorology right out of school. I've got interns. In fact, Adam Frederick, who's at KIMT up there in Mason City, is one of my former interns. And so we get interns from, well, now we get them from Texas A&M University. When I was in Dallas, we got them from Oklahoma. And, it's a lot easier when you graduate from college, if you want to go into weather, to have that BS in meteorology or atmospheric science, depending on the college that you're going to. That would be an easier way. I don't think you necessarily need to have a master's. And there may be some people that disagree with me on that. I'm not a big fan of doctorate in meteorology, and I'll tell you why. Because it gets to a certain point where you get so much up here and you're so heady that you forget how to communicate the simple things to the viewer. And what we do here is communication. We have to be able to communicate the threats, the risks. We have to communicate what's going to happen in the next 12 to 24 hours. And I've worked with some really smart people in my career who simply couldn't do that task, couldn't get the communication out. And you got to be able to do that. And so, I'm not a big fan of get the most education you possibly can, especially if you're going into a field where you can communicate. I haven't met too many PhDs that can actually communicate on the level that the normal folk can understand.
You mean a PhD that could actually be on television without trying to talk to the public? The public doesn't have a PhD.
Right.
That would be the problem. You have to talk into a normal sense that probably quite a few people have at least had some college, like me, because I did go to college and didn't finish. We won't discuss that. It's been discussed numerous times on this program. But I'll just say I hate calculus. That's all I need to say. So that's what killed me.
But even so some of the students I've worked with over the years that are working toward a BS, and we don't take any interns unless they're a junior in college. So that way we know that they're committed, that this is what they want to do. And almost every single one comes in, and when we don't do chroma key work until after they have successfully done over the period of several weeks good forecasting. And then we talk about storytelling, and we talk about creating a forecast. And then we get into graphic work, and then finally we move over to the chroma key, because I think you got to have the good forecast to start off with. And so we start there. And when they finally get over to the chroma key wall, I think almost every student I've ever worked with has used the word convection or vorticity on the air. And you can't do that. Nobody's going to understand or advection. I'm like, you can't. It's going to advect warm air into the area. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
I know what it means, but I'm to the person at home, what does that mean?
Is that starting to get to the point that a lot of young people are kind of using a lot of this, so they're thinking, ooh, I'm smart, and it's confusing the public more?
Well, but I also think that there is a segment of the population, and this is because of the availability of the internet now. And if you watch the Weather Channel, they do use the word convection, for example, when they're talking about thunderstorm development or in tropical development. So they're using more scientific words, and I know the students are doing that in their everyday language. So it's hard for them to turn that switch off and just say thunderstorms as opposed to convection. And it's so there's a learning process. And I think that if you spend 6-8 years studying for your master's and your PhD, it's going to be really hard, I think, for you to shut that off. Prove me wrong. I'm not saying it can't be done. I don't think it's necessary in this side of the business. There may be other parts of meteorology where it is, but I don't think in this side of the business that's necessary. A BS, yes, but I'm not sure beyond that.
Yeah, because I went into meteorology at Iowa State, and I'm thinking, why do I need all these calculus courses? I know now for the fact, but I'm thinking this is, and that's what killed me, because it just drove me nuts. I'm thinking all I want to do is do the weather. I don't need to know all the stuff. I don't want to be a math professor. It drove me absolutely nuts. And I'm like, I know And I took a beginning. I couldn't even take beginning meteorology at Iowa State. I couldn't do that till I was a sophomore. Thinking,
Right.
now, of course, now they do it as a freshman. They did
Right.
that because I started criticizing. I started yelling at my advisor, saying, "Why do I have to wait till my second year?"
Hmm.
And they must have listened, or a bunch of people must have done it, because they did move that into the freshman year. So it's like, you're a meteorology major, but you're not taking any meteorology courses. Like, yuck. Thinking, I started criticizing everything, saying, and then if I took it, it'd say, what is a cold front? What is a warm front? I'm like, I know this. Can I just go to an advanced level, please?
You know, there's a lot of I've run into along the ways students who, and juniors and seniors in college. So we're talking, a year out before they're out the door into the workforce, and can't do a model plot. Whose idea of forecasting is to just look at numeric MOS data and to average out some numbers. I run into that. In fact, this goes back when I was working in Dallas, but I remember going home one night saying to my wife, I got to fire my intern. And she goes, you can't do that. I'm like, he can't do any of the work. He knows nothing about meteorology. And, he's going to be a senior next year. And I didn't, it was a tough, I did end up letting him go because I couldn't work with him. I can't, I said to him, and it changed how I interview now potential interns. We talk about, can you do a model analysis? Yeah, we don't do that a lot, but every once in a while I'll print out, a station plot and say, okay, find the dry line somewhere in Texas and show me where the sea breeze is setting up, if there are any outflow boundaries out there. Because sometimes you do have to do a little mesoanalysis to figure out what's going on outside. And, so you got to be able to do that. You got to be able to understand that. And, sometimes students are like, well, I think I've had some of that. Maybe it's gotten better. I don't know, but
yeah, I know how to do some of that stuff. I learn as I'm more or less, I look at stuff and then I learn as I go. I wouldn't just say, well, just do something, because I've had some really bad forecasts, but most of them are the case of these air mass thunderstorms that just blow up. They don't move. 90% of the state's dry, because on our website we cover the whole state of Iowa, and I'm like, I don't know where these boundaries are going to set up. It's like, it's so annoying.
But see, a lot of people don't realize a lot of the surface analysis maps that you're seeing online are all computer generated. That's why you see like 14 low pressures out over the Rockies, because you can't figure out where the lowest pressure is. And so they're computer generated, and there have been a couple of times where even our local National Weather Service will say in their description, the cool front's sitting north of Houston, and I'm looking, and I'm doing hand analysis saying, no, it's not. It's still in Dallas. Little things like that if you look at these automated drawn maps, you're not going to. I think you're missing something there in your forecast, and maybe little boundaries. Down here, a small little boundary is all we need to get thunderstorms to fire up along that, especially when you're heating up the temperature above your convective temperature, and reaching that every day. So you need something to kind of focus that.
Yeah, that's what we had with the storms that we discussed at the beginning. A boundary came in from Minnesota. I think it was an outflow boundary from storms up there yesterday or last night. Mm-hmm. And it was moving like 5 miles an hour to the south. Then the storms finally unzipped right along it, and and I haven't had the radar up since because I turned it off. They've been trying to build north, and so it's, and I didn't see that boundary on radar until mid-afternoon, so.
Did you do a model plot? Did you look at a surface analysis there?
No.
Okay.
I did look at temperatures across the state, though, and found that the temperatures were in the mid-80s, the dew points are in the 70s, and the heat index was near 100. I'm thinking, I don't like this weather. And we've not had dew points in the mid to upper 70s this summer. This is the first time it's been really boiling. And of course, what ends up happening, as you would know, with it being this time of the year, school has started. Well, school's already started in half of the state so far. So
it happens all the time, everywhere. As soon as the kids get back in school, the temperatures we're supposed to have almost 100 degrees Monday, and HISD, Houston Independent School Districts, are in class.
Yeah, here was something that happened last year. Our warmest day of the year last year was August 30th. It hit 100. What was notable about that? It's the first week of high school football.
Oh, yeah.
And you're sending kids out to play football, and it's 100 degrees. I have never heard so many people scream and yell about, it's so hot, these kids are going to swelter. It's 95 degrees, and it wasn't even humid that day. It was kind of a dry.
Probably dry.
We had storms later, but
yeah, right.
I'm thinking, and now we're getting to that again. Luckily, they're not playing this week, this Friday, because they moved all into next Friday. But I'm thinking, is Mother Nature trying to come up with a ploy of having the hottest weather in Iowa when football starts? And
right.
I know in 2012, 2 years ago, when we had the drought, it was hot all of July and almost half of August, where it was like 100 like every day. It reminded me of '88, because I can remember in '88 when I was young and going to the swimming pool, because it was 100 degrees, it was hot, it was awful, and 2012 reminded me of that. So bad. I'm sure you'd probably remember 1988 in some cases. I don't know where you were at the time. If you were still in, you went to Missouri at the time. Where were you? You were probably in a cornfield.
88. Was I still in Dubuque? Yes, I was still in Dubuque at the time.
Yeah. Talk about the drought or any droughts even back during your times in Dallas and then where you are now in Houston.
You know, it reminded me when you were talking about where were you. I often tell people that I was working in Dubuque at the time that the temperature dropped to 27 degrees below zero, and it was, you know, I always tell people you have no idea how cold that is. And then last year we decided we were going to go up and visit my family after Christmas, and we got into the polar vortex.
Yeah.
And so, and I'm almost embarrassed to tell you the story. So we are. This is, I think it's January 2nd or 3rd. We're supposed to fly back out of Moline, and of course they cancel our flight. The weather's fine. I don't know why they canceled it, but they canceled our flight, and I couldn't get United on the phone. I did everything possible. It went online, and every time I went online, it said, we cannot adjust your flight online. You have to go. You have to call. So I'd call, and they'd say, please use our website. So I ended up driving to Cedar Rapids, and I'll shorten up this long story. So I go to Cedar Rapids, stand in line with everybody else, and finally, and while I'm doing that, I'm on my cell phone, and I'm like, okay, now it's snowing in Chicago, so and it's supposed to snow all night long, so that means if we get to Chicago, we drive to Chicago, we're probably not going to be able to get out of. Oh, and by the way, they told me that the next flight out of Cedar Rapids or Moline was 4 days later. So 4 days. They said, well, we can get you on a flight Thursday. I'm like, that's not going to work. And so we ended up, I said to my wife, listen, we're going to drive to Kansas City. They can get us on a flight tomorrow night at 6 o'clock. We're going to drive to Kansas City. So we get in the car, and my whole mind is get home, get home, get home. I got to get home, got to get the kids start back to school. So we get in the car, and we take off from Cedar Rapids. We're going to Kansas City. This is now about 8, 9 o'clock at night, and it is, I'm watching the thermometer in the car, and it's going 13 below, 15 below, 20 below zero. This is one of those nights. This was the night that the entire state of Minnesota had called school off the next day, the following Monday. So this was the big cool down. And so we're driving along on I-80, and I realize that I'm totally unprepared for this weather that we have in our car with us. My kids are on their game, so they're oblivious to all of this. I realize that we've got a bottle of red wine, a little Maker's Mark whiskey, and a thin little blanket that we use when we're on the airplane, and that's it. So if we have car trouble, we are screwed. So we ended up, and we were supposed to get to Kansas City. I said, I think we're going to stop in Des Moines for the night. Okay, we're just going to stop here because at that, and my hands were sore from trying to hold the wheel or hold the car. The wind was awful, and at one point I realized we are the only car on this highway now. It's like 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, and we're the only car out there. I ended up doing it was about 9 o'clock because I called the station. I said, listen, I'm in the middle of this cold air mass up here in Iowa. Do you want to do a live phoner with me? And so I did using my iPhone, I did a talkback interview with them from the middle of the polar vortex, or we didn't call it that, by the way, on the air, but in the middle of the cold Arctic outbreak up in Iowa. So it was, I was totally unprepared for that. I forgot all of my winter driving skills and my winter survival skills. I'm almost embarrassed to tell you that.
Yeah, but has Houston had any winter weather of late?
Yeah, we had
Ice.
two events. Yeah, we got a little ice, and let me tell you, it is teeny tiny littlest amount of ice will shut the area down because we all have all these flyover roads, all of these entrance ramps and exit ramps, and they are literally like 5 high. So you've got one ramp, one ramp, one ramp, and they're 5 stories, 5 levels high for all these major interchanges, and just a little bit of glazing on there, well, they'll shut down those ramps. Well, that shuts down the whole city. And we had 2 instances last winter, one of which didn't turn out to be as bad as people expected, and one that turned out to be a little worse than people expected, and it was just the difference of the amount of cool air we had before the onset of precipitation. And it wasn't much. I mean, I don't even think we had measurable precip, but it was enough to put a thin glaze on the roads. And we don't have salt trucks down here. We don't have, sand trucks. They put a little sand, but they don't put salt down. And the sand only gives you a little traction. It doesn't melt the ice. Yeah. And they'll spray the de-icing spray, but you got to do that before the ice and the precipitation. And so, it's embarrassing how little wintry precip will shut this city down. But we just don't have the the mechanisms to keep everybody going. It's cost prohibitive for us to have salt trucks and sand trucks, and we only use a couple of times every decade.
Yeah. Well, last winter was the winter where the state of Iowa ran out of sand.
Oh, really?
And some parts of the state ran out of sand. I know here in Anamosa, they stopped plowing the streets after February, and we had several snowstorms. That is so bad.
Right.
I'm thinking, oh my God! Because it just kept snowing and snowing and snowing and snowing. But it was not like the snow 2007-08 where it was like all this wet snow. It was pretty much dry snow, so there was very little moisture content to it, but enough that it wasn't going to cause the planting and whatnot, that we'd have no moisture. But I'm thinking, oh my God, I have to drive in this mess, and it was so bad. The only roads that would be clear would be the 4-lane highway that's out here. Back then it was 2 lanes when you were here, but the 4-lane highway out here between Cedar Rapids and Dubuque was the only one that was clear, and then the state highway that went from here to Maquoketa. Every other road was pretty much snow-packed from about Valentine's Day until finally when it warmed up and everything melted. Thinking, wow. Oh my God, I don't like this. Please buy more sand and salt this winter. So I can understand even a little ice will close everything down, but then when we have too much winter weather and they don't buy enough, then you have pretty much the South where they all crash and don't know what they're doing.
When I worked in Missouri, they used cinders on the roads. I don't know if they still do that, but basically ash. And your car looked awful all winter long because it was this black-gray stuff that they would put down for traction and to help on the ice. And we were in Jeff City. In Jeff City, it was like this tipping point there. It was like the storms would come right up from the southwest from Springfield, and we would get this glaze of ice where they would get the snow up around Kansas City into Iowa. But we were always seemed to be in this band of ice, and so they'd put down cinders to combat the ice, and that was awful.
Yeah, please don't tell people
don't go there.
To have that, because that. It's bad enough with sand and salt, because the salt, you'll get the salt kind of grime on cars, and especially with the de-icing stuff, because they do that.
Right.
Thank goodness. They did that last year when it wasn't even snowing. When we had all that cold below 0 temperatures, they would start de-icing the bridges because they thought they would freeze more or something. Thinking, okay. I think the entire month of January was below 0. I don't think it warmed up until February.
Well, Jeff, I've got a few more minutes, and then I have to go here because we got to tape some news briefs and things like that for our 10 o'clock newscast.
So we'll
what
get
else
to
do we need to talk about.
Yeah, we'll get to the end of doing. We'll do like the shout outs now, since if I keep talking, we'll talk for like another hour. So I know you need to do news briefs, and you need to tell people about the praying mantis that tried to attack you on news
Oh, did you
today.
see that?
I saw the twit. I saw it on Twitter.
Oh,
So,
okay. There's
so
actually we've got a wasp nest. I don't know why. I'm always surprised that the wasps like to build their nest. We've got a 700-foot tower, and there's every summer a wasp nest builds and they're fine until we go to move the camera, and then of course they get mad, and they love to stand. And usually, we move it early enough. We think, okay, the wasp will settle down, just in time for the newscast. And then this one landed right when we took the camera live on the air, right behind me. And, it's there. You can't ignore it. I tried, but
yeah. So we'll do the shout outs now. This is where you shout out anything: a book, a person, an intern that you can't stand, and whatnot, or detasseling people. So, do you have anybody to shout out about a book, a person?
Well, you've held up my books. I mean, or not my books, but you held up 3 of my favorite books. Which I love because they remind me of the Midwest and Iowa. The first one is called Jackson and the Trilogy, and it's, if you read it, it's kind of, you'll recognize some places in Dubuque, which is where the author spent a lot of time, and
Except not now, because Dubuque's changed so much.
Oh yeah, very different. Walter Plowman is the name of the weatherman in that book, and I'll give you a personal shout out. Feel free to follow me on Twitter and Facebook, Heller Weather, Heller Weather, and I like to connect with people on there. It's the nice thing about social media. It's like a built-in focus group, and you kind of know immediately what people are concerned about and the questions they have, and we can tailor our broadcast and our coverage based on what the needs are of the viewer, and really what we do on the air. I mean, it's a service for the viewer. If we're not providing you with what you need, then you're going to look for someplace else. And so it's. I remember many years ago, in fact, on our weathercast here at Channel 13, we have when we're not doing the heat index or the wind chill, next to the current temperature is the temperature in Celsius. And when we first started doing that, you would be surprised in the number of people that were upset about that. They thought, we were placating, or we were trying to appease the immigrants that are coming in. I mean, it would be bizarre, some of the concerns that people had. And the reason we did it is because we had a request we've got one of the largest hospital districts here in the country, and one of the best in the world. And we have a lot of people that visit us from other countries, not just Mexico, but from other countries where they do the weather in Celsius. And so and it was requested I got a request from a viewer. It said, would you mind, including the temperature in Celsius on your weathercast? I said, how about if I do this? If I do the whole weathercast in Celsius, people are not going to be happy. But how about if I just put it on the current temperature so that you can kind of gauge where we are, in terms of, what 82 degrees is 28 degrees Celsius, so you can kind of gauge where we are. When I'm saying it's 82, you kind of know what that means. And it is all a viewer request. So a lot of what we do is based on the needs of the viewer, and we can't do everything, but we try.
Yeah, I mean, you can't please everybody because there'll be people mad, there'll be people happy. So
yeah, I was surprised. I got to say at the backlash on that. It's calmed down since then.
So now you're gonna complain about that. They'll probably be sent to the detasseling cornfield or something.
Yeah, right.
So. Yeah, we'll let you head off to doing news promos, and then you can be up in Iowa complaining about the heat and the corn crops. So.
But I'm looking forward to those pork tenderloins at the Prairie Moon Ball, and there's my shout out for you. The Prairie
Moon, the bar, the thing. So yeah.
Bar and Grill, awesome pork tenderloins. They're literally about this big. They're bigger than your head.
And it's at the corner with the blinking light. I think there's still a flashing light there.
The same spot where they used to have the Prairie Moon Ballroom.
Yeah, we'll tell people where to drive to. Just drive until you run out of gas, and then you're probably there. Because there's no gas station. You'd have to drive to Central City to buy gas.
No, there's a gas station now.
I think it might. I don't know if it's still there or not. But It might be there, so I'm not sure. So,
Yeah, I think.
yeah.
Well, it used to. Well, when I was there a couple of months ago, it's right across the street from the kitty corner
Yeah.
from the Prairie Moon Bar and Grill.
You drive through it, and it's like a blink of an eye, you're gone. So,
Oh, I know.
yeah.
Yes.
But now we're reminiscing, and you need to work. So.
Okay. Well, Jeff,
So,
this has been
well,
fun.
Yeah, well, we might bring you back on, but then you'll probably talk about cornfields or whatnot. So, okay, thanks a lot.
All right. Have a great night. Thank you.
Okay, you too. And we'll see if Tim can actually know how to. Okay, he knew how to turn off the computer. So, yeah, that was our show. That was Tim Heller from KTRK in Houston. So, if you have any questions to ask us, feel free to write to us. I don't remember what our email address is, so now I don't remember that. Oh, crud. Okay, but anyway. So, yeah, you can email us at info@iawx.net. info@iawx.net. I think. I'll let you know if that's different. But anyway, so this has been issuance number 22. Next week we're going to have Storm Chaser Skip Talbot on. More excitement probably in store. Hopefully we're not going to have severe weather between now and then, and hopefully we won't have severe weather where Skip's going to go running off to go chase storms. So we'll have him next week. So between then and now, enjoy the weather outside. It's going to be very hot around here. Might cool off later in the week. So God bless. Have a good weekend and good night.